access. And you know what? We shared it with the Caribbean. We did these things because we were aware that unless Africans stood up and embraced their thinking and understood their value, that we would not be able to surmount the challenge of COVID-19. And I hope that historians will look back to that bureau, to Africa CDC, and to all the other experts that were brought together in the year 2020 and mark it as a watershed point for Pan-Africanism. It was extraordinary. It is extraordinary. Had it not been for the engagement of Africans themselves, getting into partnerships, even with the private sector, we would not have had our first testing kit in this continent. And we must thank Prime Minister Abiy of Ethiopia and the World Food Programme and the Jack Ma Foundation that made that possible. It is that type of innovation that informed the Africa Bureau, that has informed Africa CDC. We have learned that the power of ideas can move mountains, and they have. And we thank our heads of states for that, and we are proud that our country was part of that team that found solutions for our continent. But we have gone further in embracing Pan-Africanism. On the 7th of September 2021, the African Union held its very first summit with CARICOM, with Caribbean states, descendants of Africa, Africa's sixth grouping. A powerful meeting, a watershed meeting. It was virtual. You could have probably had more fireworks if it was an in-person meeting. But what came out of there was a realization that unless we work together as a people to surmount the challenges of today, we will not succeed. And it is my hope that this amalgamation of hope, this amalgamation of aspiration that came out of the AU CARICOM summit will take root and grow and become a powerful tree that will provide a canopy for Africans everywhere. At the AU Peace and Security Council, we also realized that Pan-Africanism cannot work unless we begin to look at the emerging challenges and critical lessons that arise from trying to create sustainable peace. And this was an important discussion. Why? Because security threats have changed phenomenally in Africa. The threat environment and the environment in which peacekeepers operate, in which our people suffer, has changed. We need new tools, we need new perspectives, we need new policies, we need new theories. We cannot manage the peace in Africa the way we managed it 20 years ago. The threats are different, our people are different, and time is not on our side. And I hope that the communique that came out of that meeting will be widely read by those who are interested in peacekeeping and peace support operations on our continent. They have to adapt to the threat of terrorism. They have to adapt to the threat of climate change. They have to adapt to the threat of rapid urbanization. They have to adapt to poverty and exclusion and an international order in which the African continent is poorly integrated. We have to adapt so that peace becomes real for our people, so that peace is achievable. We've also moved towards South-South cooperation, especially at the Organization of African and Caribbean and Pacific States, to try and help them speak about the small island agenda, the threat of climate change to small islands. Many small islands are middle-income countries that do not get preferential treatment and are likely to slide back to the status of LCDs or LDCs, whatever you call them, okay? Attention has to be paid to small island states with small populations. They're part of our universe too. And you know, they're not really small. If you look at their continental shelves, they're huge countries, actually. Huge, massive countries. I think Seychelles, if you look at its continental shelf and its EEZ, is a massive country. It just looks small now. But one day it will be a huge country when it exploits its resources. Let us not dismiss the small. And it is from the small that powerful ideas come. Yesterday, I was in a Commonwealth Foreign Ministers meeting, and this idea of a vulnerability index arose from discussions between small island states. This idea that you need to temper measurement of development by looking at vulnerability and not just at GDP. And that's a powerful idea, an idea that if we look at carefully might help small island states, might help us think about trade, development, and investment differently. Finally, in asserting our principles, we were able, we feel, to strengthen the A3+1 at the United Nations Security Council. The A3+1 is Africa's instrument in the EU. No, I mean in the United Nations Security Council. And it's an instrument that we have to wield with dexterity. And to wield it with dexterity, you need to consolidate ideas, notions, policies, to provide coherence in the manner in which we engage. We are glad that we are joined by the St. Vincent's and Grenadines delegation, who formed the +1. And there again you see that idea of Pan-Africanism. And through our efforts, we were able to hold meetings in Kenya with the A3+1, to hold them in Addis Ababa with the A3+1, to crystallize linkages between the A3+1 and the AU, Peace and Security Council. But we were doing this for three good reasons. The first is that vis-a-vis the United Nations Security Council and the Peace and Security Council of the AU, there has to be an understanding of complementarity. That's the principle. Two, there has to be an understanding of the idea of subsidiarity. That's a principle. And there must be a belief in something called self-determination. Subsidiarity is critical for us because it's through subsidiarity that our regional groups can contribute to dealing with peace and security. It is through subsidiarity and complementarity that African solutions to African problems find their salience. It is critical for us that we continue to push for African solutions to African problems, even when it appears as if the solutions are long in coming. They will arrive. The train will get to the station. What you have to do is work with us to make sure that the train accelerates quicker and picks up the right people on the journey and arrives at the right station so that the right people get to where they ought to be and the right solutions are found. That's how we need to operate in this new world where COVID-19 has told us that we have to move towards self-reliance. We have to move towards confidence. We have to move towards being proud that we are people who belong to a very rich and wonderful continent. So I want us to look at this slide and remember it. Remember the power of the African Union. Remember the power of the UN, where African states, I think, are the majority, but whose voices are rarely heard. The union across continents and oceans with CARICOM. That is a fundamental for our foreign policy, and that is how we have been trying to push for justice and for access. We also know that those closest to us, our neighbors, are where we find peace and prosperity for our people. And so even as we are looking at the bigger picture, looking at multilateralism, looking at the big issues of the world, we know that if we're not at peace with our neighbors, and if our neighbors are not at peace with themselves, then we as a nation will live in a state of constant nightmares, of constant feelings of being unsettled, of not being able to trade, of not being able to move goods and services, of not being able to share our cultural heritage, and not being able to strengthen our region. So we have tried to do our best to strengthen relationships with our neighbors, to strengthen relationships not just with our neighbors that are near, but the near abroad, and also to strengthen bilateral ties beyond our neighborhood. But we have seen that our neighborhood is critical to us. And therefore, we will continue to work with our neighbors, those who need humanitarian assistance. We have been able to provide it in South Sudan, in Mozambique, in Congo, because, you know, even Africans can give support. We must realize that support doesn't necessarily have to come out of this continent. I remember when India was going through its really, really hard situation, and we didn't have anything. We didn't have medicines. We didn't have PPEs. All we had was coffee and tea, and we gave that. And you know what? That's good enough, because it showed that we love these people, and we understood what their people were going through. Yeah? And they appreciated what India had done for us also. The thousands of those of Kenyans who go there for medical care. The donations of vaccines, of PPEs, of medicines. Africa must also be a giver. Give what you have. The Lord likes a cheerful giver. Give what you have. And give it joyfully. Yes? So that's one of the lessons we learned. Let's not wait for others to give. Help where you can. And we have been delighted to support our neighborhood in their times of crisis, our neighbors in their times of crisis. And I know that in our times of crisis, they have also supported us. Another relationship that we think is so critical is the relationship we have with the United Nations office in Nairobi. And I really want to thank my sister, Director General Bangura, and the RC, Mr. Jackson, Ambassador Jackson. We were stunned. One of the things that stunned us during COVID-19 was the UN footprint in Kenya and in our region. It was mind-boggling. We were stunned. We are stunned by the agencies that work here. We are stunned by those who come here for rest and recuperation. We are stunned by the humanitarian work that's done from here. We are stunned by the medivacs that come in and out of our country. Our minds are just stunned. I think the only word we can use is stunned. And it's then that we realize the importance of our country as a host to the United Nations. It's especially its humanitarian agencies. And we thank you all. I don't know whether you're represented here only by, where are you? Thank you. Thank you all so much. UNHCR and UNAIDS. Thank you. Yeah? Amazing work these people do, and they do it quietly and they engage. We are shocked at how many of your children go to school here, and how many needed to be moved when we had the exodus, thousands of them. We were shocked at how much food has to come in, how much humanitarian aid has to come through our country. And you know what? We felt blessed that the UN, many years ago in the 70s, chose this country to be the UN Office of the Global South. So it is our duty now, as we are seeking justice, now that we are seeking inclusion, to ensure that this office has its rightful place in the UN system. We have to ensure that it is strengthened, that its programs, UNEP, UN Habitat, are strengthened. Nairobi is the center of environmental multilateralism. It is not Geneva, it is not some other country. This is where the discussions must take place. This is where Africa and the South meet the UN. And we are delighted that the UN came to the need of the humanitarian community in Africa and to our need as Kenyans by building a COVID-19 hospital in 4 months. Yeah? From our sister here, we learned what project management was all about. Okay? And that things can be done and can be done well in record time. But what it did, what that hospital has done, it has taught us, or it has illustrated what a seemingly small thing like that can do to medevac worldwide. Kenya is now the center for UN medevac all over the world. Can you do that? Believe it. Believe it. That's how that small, what seems seemingly small, produced. It wasn't the structure, it was the power of the idea and the courage to implement it. And we thank the UN, Department of Peacekeeping Operations. We thank the SG. We thank His Excellency the President, who actually conceptualized the idea. And we thank you all for working together to produce a new model. And what was that model? The model is that the UN can expand its footprint if it engages with the private sector, if it engages with government, and if it engages with UN agencies. That triangulation is powerful. And we saw it live and in color through the building of the COVID-19 hospital. But it taught us other things also. And that is the need for us to be prepared to serve the humanitarian community in this country effectively. And I want to thank Ambassador Gitonga. Are you here? One of the things that we did, because of the many requests and the distress that we were seeing during COVID-19 and the fact that there were lockdowns and curfews and restrictions, was that the humanitarian community was disturbed. And we also took note of what the United Nations Secretary General said, that we had to show solidarity with the humanitarian work. So we thought, how do we do this? How do we deal with these complaints? How do we deal with these requests? How do we make your lives easier in a time of corona? And we established a committee that deals specifically to the it manages, it's a multi-agency committee that deals with the humanitarian sector in this country. It is still in its infancy, but it's made a difference, hasn't it? Yes, it's made a difference. And so what we want to do is to crystallize that, give it permanence, give it resources, give it agility, so that those who help, those who are most vulnerable, have their needs served. Huge lesson from COVID-19. On the humanitarian side, we also learned this lesson, that in dealing with refugees, dealing with displaced people, there has to be burden sharing. And that's a principle that we will continue to enunciate in every forum that we can find. There has to be burden sharing. It cannot be that very few countries in this world bear the burden of the refugee crisis merely because they're proximate to the crisis that has caused people to flee. Solidarity means that people share burdens. And sharing of burdens doesn't just mean throwing money at it. It is actually taking refugees in. There should be no refugees in this world. There are too many peaceful countries around our world that can take 20, 2,000, 100. This idea that refugees could live in perpetuity in camps should be unconscionable when there are countries that can take them in. And I think that is a principle that we must look at afresh in the global compact for refugees, where third-party solutions are part of the pact. We must work together to find solutions so that people do not live in distress for too long. Of course, the first approach must be to give people emergency care, to help, to heal. But when people are in a position to return, then the international community must also help in creating safe zones for people to return. It is not sufficient to expect that those who have been hosting will also facilitate safe return. There has to be partnership. And three, we must learn how to solve crises together and solve them as quickly as we can. Finally, in affirming our foreign policy based on justice, inclusion, South-South cooperation, good neighborliness, strengthening of the A3, we've also learned that we have to elevate our bilateral relations, sometimes to strategic level, but we need to engage more. And the silence that COVID-19 brought was so loud. But yet, we said, even if it means that we'll have JCCs, virtually we're going to have them. Because we realize that we need friends. We need partners, not just in our region, but across the world. And the thing about partnerships across the world is the diversity of ideas, the way they irrigate the mind, the way they make you think differently, the way they energize you, the way they give you new perspectives, new prisms to look through. And so we have tried our best. We have not done enough, but we will continue to build bilateral relationships because they are actually the foundation of the multilateral system that we are seeking, which engages all states. I want, in closing, in telling our story, to remind you about UNEP at 50. This is a place where we can all engage to celebrate an institution that started in this country in the 70s, to celebrate its achievements, to ensure that it looks forward, and to elevate its status. Those of you who engage with that institution know its importance. And coming after COP26, it should leave you energized, ready to engage with UNEP and to ensure that it becomes that place for environmental multilateralism, that it draws in the thinkers, that big ideas, big solutions will come from UNEP in Kenya, and that those ideas will operate across the world. We want to see UNEP become what it was when people dreamt about it in the 70s. We have a chance to make that legacy. Let's do it. Let's not be afraid. Let's be fearless. So that's our story. I think there are many parables, many lessons. I don't know whether I've told it as sweetly as I could have. I don't know whether I have lullabied you to sleep. I hope not. But I think it was important for us to tell you what we stand for, why we do the things that we do, to tell you about what we think is pertinent, what we think is germane to our journey towards development, not just as Kenya, but as a member of EAC, a member of IGAD, a member of the AU, a member of the Community of Nations. It's important that as diplomats that we also teach, that we educate. Because if we do not educate, if we do not explain, then you won't know who you're dealing with, and we want you to know who you're dealing with. We want you to know who you're dealing with. And you will find that many African countries will today tell you, you must know who you're dealing with. People will no longer pretend to be who they're not, because we have COVID-19 has shown us that we must stand. We must stand. And we must face our problems, and we must speak our truth. So all those values, all those principles, all those aspirations, all those engagements that I've told you about over the last year will crystallize in the coming months in Kenya's presidency of the United Nations Security Council. I thank you all very much for all the support that you gave us to enable us capture this seat. And we are going to try and bring new ideas to the table during our presidency. Our presidency will start in October, the 1st of October, and end on the 31st of October, I believe. During that time, we're going to have engagements at PR level, engagement at CS level, and engagements at presidential level. The first engagement we will have is on the 12th of October 2021, where His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta will convene an in-person head of state and government level open debate on peace building and sustainable peace under the theme Identity, State Building, and the Search for Peace. Why is this topic critical? It's critical because the whole world is trying to deal with diversity. Not just in Africa, everywhere. Demographics are changing. Immigration is moving at a very high speed. Inequalities are being exposed in our social fabrics. We are under environmental stress. Urbanization is taking its toll. If we don't deal with diversity, inequality, if we don't deal with the ungoverned spaces it creates, then we will not be able to capture the peace that we seek. The challenge of diversity is beginning to destabilize governments. It's beginning to challenge governments. It's beginning to break the trust between people and their governments. It will one day become a threat to international peace and security. And this is a problem that stretches across the entire world. If you all look at your societies, you will see that you're dealing with some challenge of diversity, some challenge of identity that is beginning to threaten your understanding of your social order, beginning to question the strength of your democracy, and beginning to break the trust between governments and people. When that happens, institutions crumble, and when institutions crumble, you then get an existential threat to national security. That's the idea, and I think it's an idea that we'd like your heads of state to come and discuss, because I think it is an idea for now, but also an idea for the future. His Excellency the President will also have another high-level meeting on October the 28th, 2021 at the United Nations Security Council. This will be a virtual meeting, and it will be a high-level debate on leveraging the African Union Peace and Security Architecture and sub-regional mechanisms for the continent's peace, security, and prosperity. The object of this discussion is to unpack the strengths and the capacities of the African peace and security architecture in silencing the guns, in providing solutions to new threats, and in trying to sharpen the engagement of sub-regional mechanisms, RX, in delivering the peace dividend. There's a need for holistic approaches to peace, from the grassroots to the summit. It is important that we not only engage all aspects of the Africa peace and security architecture, its preventative mechanisms, its panel of wise men and women, its early warning mechanisms, its regional forces. How do we leverage all these capacities that the African peace and security architecture demands, and how do we fund them also from the continent and its resources? This is an important discussion because often the United Nations Security Council supports regional peacekeeping missions, and AMISOM is perhaps the flagship. So we need to ask ourselves, what should those relationships be? One of the biggest challenges of AMISOM is lack of force multipliers, lack of sustainable funding, yet AMISOM is fighting a threat to international peace and security. How do you ensure that in partnership with the AU, these mechanisms that are created within the continent work for peace and security? That high-level debate will be attended by His Excellency, the United Nations Secretary General, the AU Commission Chairperson, and of course, our heads of state, to whom we have already sent invitations. I also have a program at ministerial level And here we will start off with a briefing on supporting the renewed commitments of the Great Lakes countries in seeking sustainable solutions to the root causes and drivers of conflict. This will be held on October 20th, 2021. We are hoping that it will be a hybrid session where some of our colleagues can come physically while others can engage virtually. Why is this important for us? Remember I said to you, one of our foreign policy thrusts was good neighborliness. The Great Lakes are our neighbors. And we need to find out why instability in the Great Lakes has continued interminably. Why the peacekeeping strategies there have not delivered peace. What is the character of engagement in the Great Lakes today? Who are the actors, and are those actors helping the peace? So it is our hope that we will be able to look at this carefully, and we will bring our excellent briefers to set the tone of these discussions. But it is essential for us, for the prosperity of East Africa, for SADC, for Central Africa, that the Great Lakes is pacified. I need to know why it has been in a state of flux for so many years. But we also want to celebrate strides, successes in places like Burundi, elections that have been held in so many of the countries of the Great Lakes. Are Africans sorting out their own problems? Let us look at it let's shine a microscope over it, a spotlight over it, and draw ideas for those who are making strides so that we can try and solve places where peace has been elusive for decades. The Great Lakes is a place where if we act in unison, so much can happen. These are the countries that are the richest on our continent, that have the greatest potential, that have large amounts of young people who can change our world. We need to look at the Great Lakes and try and find solutions and try and find the drivers of peace and stability. We'll also be investing our time in talking about investing in women peacekeepers and women peace builders. Again, this will take place on the 21st of October 2021, where we will have a discussion on how we can ensure the meaningful participation of women peacekeepers. What are the skills that they need in a changing conflict environment? How do we move from counting women, a quantitative approach, to a qualitative approach? How do we measure women's contribution, and what skills do they need to make contributions in the face of the challenges that peace is exposed to every day across the world? That session will be supported by the opening of an exhibition, a traveling exhibition, in conjunction with the UN Department of Peace Operations, and it's called In the Hands, Women Taking Ownership for Peace. It is an exhibition that showcases the work of peacekeepers, peace builders, mediators, decision makers, all of those actors the Resolution 1325 talks about. And it is an exhibition that will travel across the world, I believe, at least across the African continent for a start. And we hope that you will one day be able to see it when we bring it to Kenya. Our PRs will also have a discussion on small arms and light weapons, which is a critical discussion, and how that contributes to insecurity in our region. And it will be part of a briefing also from, I believe, the United Nations Secretary General and his team. And we will also organize a visit to the Sahel by the by the United Nations Security Council members. Finally, to close out the month of October, His Excellency the President will attend the UNCTAD 15 conference in Barbados. Will hand over the chairmanship to Prime Minister Motley in Barbados. At the level of the United Nations General Assembly that is already taking place, our head of state will participate in the Food Security Summit, in the high-level dialogue on access to energy. He will also participate in discussions around the Durban Declaration and on racial discrimination and xenophobia. Just to make sure I'm getting that right. I think that's it. All these will take place during the United Nations Security Council. Many of these high-level engagements are not virtual at the request of the United Nations itself, but they will present huge opportunities to look at nutrition, climate change, and again the issue of identity through the Durban Declaration on Racial Discrimination and Xenophobia. I myself will take part in some engagements with the Alliance for Multilateralism. I'll take place in a roundtable on the digital space, and I'll also engage in discussions around climate change and hold a series of bilateral meetings with my colleagues who we have not seen for 1.5 years. So there's the end of the tale, the end of the story. I hope it was not too long. I hope that we have been able to engage productively and to demonstrate that our foreign policy isn't just a thing of caprice. It's a thing of thought, it's a thing of strategy, and it's a thing for justice. I thank you.
Thank you, thank you, and thank you again, Minister. When this started, I had said that our Minister inspires us, guides us, energizes us, breaks new grounds for us, gives us new language, opens ideas that change the very, very many things that have been stuck in our minds for over a century. Perceptions of who we are, who we represent, what it means to be African in this world, what it means to be a development partner. These are fundamental things. Today we heard the redefinition of justice and inclusion and human rights, something that's kicked around so often. And yet when you look at the reality, the injustices that are there in our world that our minister has spoken about, that are rooted in the structures of our systems, hugely important to us. The redefinition of peace, Minister gave us, is not just the absence of war. Because is Kenya at peace when there is poverty and lack of inclusion? Are your countries at peace when there is lack of inclusion and diversity in your own societies? Are they destined for peace? What we've seen in the last few years, the redefinition of vulnerabilities, all these things that that are so important to our foreign policy. I hope the media listened, because we're forever in combat with the media in Kenya. Because the reaction to these issues tends to be, who did you call? What does that country want? How are you reacting? Why are you not doing that? And I always take trouble to try to explain that the world is a complex place. And we have to become sophisticated and complex. And my minister is the epitome of that nature of foreign policy in the new Africa. This is my opinion, and I strongly hold to those views. Refugees. Why does this paradigm still persist? Why, Minister asks? Why are camps acceptable? Why are camps part of our business model for dealing with refugees? Why? Why do we keep being foisted upon that we must accept camps and hold people in camps when you all have space, you all have the humanity to accept these people in your own countries? Nunzio, I want the Pope to take this up for us, just like he did in the climate change debate. We need a voice of moral and ethical power in the world to ask this question and ask it again and again and again. Minister is right. This is unacceptable. It is unconscionable, to use her words. 35 years, 3 generations sitting in Kakuma and in Dadaab. Well, shame on all of us. Minister is right. We have to redefine human rights, the right to life and the right to health. It is unacceptable that we are pilling in donations of vaccines to Africa, to our country, which we appreciate and we're grateful for. But we have contracts that have not been honored, that we have paid money for those vaccines to come to us. And those contracts have not been honored. And those vaccines has headed to other countries, mainly in the West. It is unconscionable. Minister is right. There should be collective shame among us that this persists. So we have to see Ambassador Ndabi has to get up week in, week out to go and receive 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 vaccines. When we have contracts for millions, tens of millions that have not been honored, well, shame on all of us. Minister, I truly share your feelings about this. I really do. And I'm so proud to have you as my minister. So no, I did not undersell you. I knew you would take us to a different space, and you would demand that these ideas, to use her language, will irrigate our minds. Because our minds seem to be falsified, fossilized in the wrong space, in a space that represents a narrative that belongs to the colonial era. We need a new narrative, and Minister has given it to us. To the media, please hear this narrative. Interpret what you do in that narrative. I thank you all. You've been extremely kind. You've been extremely patient. And now I must receive some questions. And these questions will be about the subject of what we have discussed. So if you want to know about other subjects that we have not discussed, you will wait another time, because it is my nature to insist that we keep program. And it's only a few minutes because it's almost lunchtime. So I'll start with the resident coordinator, then I'll go to the ambassador of Iran. We'll start with those two because I see the hands up already. Please.
I'll copy you, Minister, and just remove my mask when I'm speaking. Wesley, if an Irishman says he feels like he's been to church, that's not always a good thing. But I want to tell you that I mean it in the best of senses today. I felt a holy fire in the room. I hope the nuncio will forgive me when I say this. That was an address of remarkable passion and extraordinary salience. Three very quick points. Number one, to thank you, and I know Zainab will join me in this. You asked us to believe that Kenya's opening of the Medevac hospital had been a major contribution. I was sitting in Gabon for 4 years as resident coordinator, and during the first year of this pandemic, and I can tell you the size of relief that were heard from our UN country team when we knew we could stay and deliver because of Kenya. And I know that that was shared not only by everybody else in the UN, the African continent, but you're quite right, we have medevacs coming from as far away as Asia. So thank you. Second point, when you received your sister, the Deputy Secretary General, last week, and I had the honor to be with her, she said that she couldn't find a word in the English language to express her sense of profound injustice in terms of global vaccine inequity. You didn't use an English word today, you used an Afrikaans word with a very ugly and violent history, and I think you're absolutely right. And we should feel that sense of shame, PS, and we must do something about it. And I want to alert you all to the Secretary General's report of last week, our common agenda, in which he says very much the same thing and calls urgently for a global vaccine initiative and a global vaccine plan. It is needed now more than ever, and we're committed to work on that with you at our humble level. I think I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador of Iran.
First of all, I would like to thank Her Excellency, Madam CS, for this gathering, because after almost 2 years of Corona, we had the chance to meet our colleagues which were away from each other in last 2 years. Secondly, Madam Excellency, I believe in what you said about Africa. We share the same belief. And as Iranian ambassador, we are standing with Africa as we have shown in the past. And we are ready to help in whatever area we can do based on our capabilities and capacity. In that regard, recently, on one of the most important issues in Africa, which is silencing the guns in Africa, my MC has an initiation which started in December 2020. We hold a World Cartoon Festival on applying arts and culture in silencing guns in Africa. 10 days ago, I sent an invitation to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Kenya, the UN, and all diplomatic corps regarding these. The closing ceremony of this initiative is going to be in our embassy. We received lots of artworks, which is a different message regarding silencing the guns in Africa. I would like to personally invite you to come. I'm sure you will enjoy what the other countries of the world, especially the cartoonists, believe is about the silencing the guns in Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Madam Director General of UNON, please. All right, we need to close this out, so you let me know if anybody wants to say anything.
Thank you very much, Madam Cabinet Secretary and Mr. Pierce. I want to thank you very much, and thank you very much for organizing the UN here. And I think when she spoke about how important Kenya is to the United Nations,
In Kenya, we have about 73 offices of the UN. We have the largest footprint in the African continent. And our office, UNON, which is a service delivery office, provides services for the UN in over 150 countries. Today, it is the biggest service delivery UN office in the world. And I think that tells you how important the UN is, including supporting 131 RCs. And when she spoke about when the COVID happened, we had a lot of challenge. We had MAVAC, thanks to Ambassador Kitunga, the CS and the PS, created what you call Sunfest. Building this hospital, $7.8 million in 4 months was no child's play. And today, as the CS said, we receive 50% of the global UN medevac in the world. And so for us, the UN, Kenya is extremely important. And we were able to achieve a lot of the milestones with late night meetings, with the PS to support. When the office was open, the minister said, thank God, told the president, thank God because I stopped having 2 a.m. meetings. But the hospital itself was the vision of the president of Kenya, who together with the Secretary General decided that the global international community need a specialized medevac. And it was funded with most modern equipment, some of it you can't find in East or Central Africa, only in Kenya. So you really, all of the things you say, for me, I just say, wow.
Thank you.
That's all I can say. Because 2 things I learned from it. First, at the banquet table, there are no reserved seats. Africa is taking its rightful place. Secondly, if you don't know what you want, they'll give you what they think you want. And what she has said to us, Africa knows what it wants. And Africa is going to sit on the table. As a United Nations here, in the presence of my brother, I can assure you, we will do everything to support. And thank you very much for hosting us. It's the biggest UN presence in Africa. And you have the only UN headquarters, my office, in Africa and the Global South. So we're very happy we're here. And thank you very much for everything we've had, we've listened, and thank you for your support.
Sweden.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador of Sweden. This is turning out to be a love fest.
I was actually thinking of posing a question, if I may. So thank you, Madam Secretary, for a very, very inspiring speech. And thank you for hosting us here today, PS, as well. We are looking forward to Kenya's presidency of the United Nations Security Council, which Sweden, who is a strong supporter, like Kenya, of the multilateral system, we always look to. One of the biggest crises we have today, which has been very pertinent these last months, is the crisis in Afghanistan. And we have there a new government, if you want to call it like that. And I know, Madam Secretary, your engagement for 1325 and for women in general. And I wanted to know, what can the Security Council do and what can Kenya do to assure that women are also going to take part of the governance of Afghanistan under these circumstances? The women have been eliminated from the governance of that country and from playing a meaningful role. And what is, during the time of the month of October, and I think the UNGA as well, Afghanistan will play a prominent role. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think we'll stop there. I'll let the minister, if you could get a mic that's all nicely cleaned up while you clean it up. I'll just let you know why it is I turned to the nuncio a little earlier. Many of you know we were negotiating the Sustainable Development Goals, and we got to an impasse. And some very powerful countries were very, very resistant to certain things. The ambassador of Russia was there. Yes, you were there. And we had impasses. And we had to get the Pope, who issued Laudato Si, which was a special narrative on issues of climate change and development that broke the back, the ethical back, the moral back of resistance in the world on those issues that had completely boggled us as negotiators and as political actors. So when I look to you again to help us redefine this challenge we're facing in our world that has been so eloquently spoken to by my minister, I wasn't being facetious. I was being extremely serious. Minister, the question about Afghanistan is an interesting question. I leave it to you. Thank you very much.
Resolution 25 looks at the whole issue of the participation of women in peace and security from different aspects, from the aspect of prevention, the aspect of participation, of recovery, and so on. I think with regard to the challenge in Afghanistan, the first thing we have to do is to keep the issue of the inclusion of women on the table. And therefore, the need to speak about inclusion ought to be something that is incorporated into the Women, Peace and Security agenda. But it is not just for the women of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is a case today, but everywhere women are in chains. So we must embrace the situation in Afghanistan as part of the overall struggle for women, peace and security, and for women's inclusion in decision-making, and for women's participation as peace builders and peacekeepers. What peace is in one context may be different from what peace is in the other context. So we must understand the context in which women are living in Afghanistan, and try and ensure through dialogue, through engagement, that they are able to participate effectively within that context without fear or intimidation. Let us ensure that we cast our net as wide as possible for all women in conflict, for all women who are facing challenges. And I hope that during the Women, Peace and Security Week, which I think falls in October, we'll be able to generate discussions about what happens in these type of transitions, because Afghanistan is going through a particular type of transition. It's a transition that is economic, it's a transition that is political, it's a transition that is social, and that is cultural. How does Resolution 3025 speak to that entire dynamic? So I think that is the approach that I would take, and then we will then draw lessons from other countries that have faced similar challenges, so that we are able to create best practices to deploy in circumstances of this kind. I think the knowledge is there, and I think discussions around it will assist women attain their salient place in our societies, whether it's in Afghanistan, whether it's in Congo, whether it's in Syria. The plight of women everywhere needs to be looked at and asserted, because inclusion eludes us every day. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would remind all of us what Minister said, that these solutions are to be built around, can only be realized if we understand that the UN Security Council must work with complementarity and subsidiarity. What was the third one, Minister? It was complementarity and subsidiarity, to recognize that the solution to Afghanistan will not come from New York. So to expect that Kenya or any other member of the Security Council will pronounce a solution that will be adopted by all for all is not consistent with what Minister said about complementarity and subsidiarity, recognizing what is going on in Afghanistan and recognizing that there are certain countries that have been behind the Afghan governance project for the last 20 years, and that they hold a particular responsibility, we believe, because it is their project that failed. It was their enterprise that collapsed in spectacular fashion. And those countries have a special responsibility to ensure that the transition is a transition of peace and a transition that recognizes the circumstances of Afghanistan. I will now ask for a vote of thanks from the Dean, and then we shall stand down and let you all head home. The Dean.
Dear Cabinet Secretary, Ambassador Rachel Umam, may I say it's been some time since I've been inspired by speeches. Today I am inspired, really inspired. There is a saying in my country, after wise man speak. It was a long time ago, so may I change it after wise women speak. Only foolish people dare to speak. I am not foolish, I don't speak no more.
Thank you, thank you. The Dean has spoken. You are dismissed. Thank you all very much, Minister.
He has worked tirelessly trying